Hey there, this is Natalie, and in this video I want to talk about Sara from Mushoku Tensei, aka Jobless Reincarnation. Sara played a big role in the arc we saw covered in Mushoku Tensei Season 2, Episodes 1 to 3. However, after Rudeus accidentally insulted her at the end of Episode 3, before leaving for another city with Soldat's party stepped leader, in the anime version we're left thinking that Sara is left behind, simply seething. It would be expected that she'd be potentially carrying a grudge against Rudeus that could come to the fore if they ever cross each other's paths again. Of course, this is fine in the anime, because this is also what Rudeus thinks, and it's his perspective we are following. But in the light novels, there is a segment covering Sara's point of view during these events, and this gives us a different impression of how Sara feels regarding Rudeus after he's gone. Sara speaks with Suzanne, Timothy, and even Elise, the escort Rudeus was with, and we see how her mindset about the incident changes. I'll be going over what is said in Sara's point of view section and talking about what this adds to the impact that the brief relationship Rudeus has with her has in terms of the story. If you're anime only and avoiding spoilers, this video can be considered cut content, as this stuff is unlikely to ever appear in the anime, and it takes place before the point the anime is currently up to, chronologically speaking. I'll then make a follow-up video with spoilers, talking about whether characters from this arc, like Sara, Soldat, and Suzanne, do ever appear in the story again, and if so, what happens. Before that though, a quick word from the sponsor of today's video. This video is sponsored by Atlas VPN, who are right now offering a huge summer deal. Grab it now because Atlas VPN Premium is just $1.83 per month, plus 3 months extra, and all with a 30-day money-back guarantee. Protect your privacy and get all of the benefits of Atlas VPN on all of your devices for a ridiculously low price. You can take this deal by clicking the link in the video description below, but be quick because it is a limited time offer. Now, there are a lot of reasons for using a VPN when it comes to privacy, because as we all know, Mr. Incognito mode isn't quite as trustworthy as he looks. But for me, and probably a lot of you, the most important thing I can do using Atlas VPN is watch anime that is geo-locked in my region. All of the streaming platforms like Crunchyroll, HiDive, and Netflix have completely different libraries available in different countries, and some streaming services just aren't available at all outside of specific countries. For me, living in Europe, I wouldn't be able to watch a lot of the anime I talk about on my channel without a VPN. I can very quickly and easily use Atlas to change my location to somewhere that has the content I want, and be streaming my precious anime in seconds. Equally, for users in the US, using Atlas VPN to access things like Canadian or UK Netflix can unlock a huge amount of content that you wouldn't normally have access to. Also, as a bit of a life hack, you can even save a lot of money on things like online subscription services, flights, and hotels by using Atlas VPN to bypass region-based price discrimination. Atlas VPN offers lightning-fast connection speeds, and you can use it on every one of your devices with just one subscription. Plus, while you're browsing or streaming content through Atlas VPN, you'll be protected by their powerful cybersecurity features, which block all of the malicious links, ads, and trackers, and alert you if any of your data has been exposed by data security breaches. There's never been a better time to start using Atlas, so use my link in the description to grab their summer deal, which gives you Atlas VPN Premium for just $1.83 per month, plus 3 months extra, and all with that 30-day money-back guarantee. Protect your privacy and have a better online experience with Atlas VPN for this fantastic low price. But again, do be quick as it is a limited time offer. Thank you so much to Atlas VPN for sponsoring this video, and now let's get back to talking about Sara. Before I read her point of view segment, there is a difference between the light novel and anime that you need to know for all of this to make sense. In the anime, we saw Rudeus with just Soldat when they were talking after leaving the red light district, and Sara overheard Rudeus's remarks about her. In the light novel, Elise, the working girl Rudeus had visited, actually walked with them, and so she was with them when Sara saw this. This means she not only saw who Rudeus was comparing her unfavourably to, but she also knew which girl he'd been with. I'm not sure why this was changed in the anime, but since the anime didn't include Sara's point of view, it isn't an important difference, except for those who wanted to see a bit more of Elise. I think it was simply to make the interaction between Rudeus and Soldat more intense without another character being involved. Still, it does matter in the light novel version, if only to allow for Sara to actually find and speak with Elise herself. And so, with that in mind, here is the Sara section of Mushoku Tensei Volume 7, Chapter 6. I'm going to read it out in full, and then talk about it a little at the end. Sara. Meanwhile, Sara was left feeling shocked and resentful after the encounter, harbouring a fierce loathing for the one named Rudeus Grey Rat. "I can't believe it. I just can't. I can't," she shrieked. It was just after noon. A substantial amount of time had passed since she'd slapped the boy. Currently, she was on the bank of a river, about half a day's distance from Rosenberg. The party was escorting some fisherfolk, a C-ranked quest that posed no danger. In other words, Sara had nothing to do. As a result, she'd spent her free time cursing Rudeus. "I can't believe with that lowlife. What scum. A complete and utter scumbag." She was frustrated. She had really liked him. Of course, she couldn't stand him at first, but even when they did their first job together, she'd more or less understood that he wasn't a bad person. Her feelings for him went no further than that. He was just a cowardly noble boy, despite the enormous power he possessed. That impression of him had only changed after what happened in the Galgal ruins. He took up the rear and faced the horde of snowdrakes without saying a word, just so that the rest of them could escape. Rudeus was certainly strong enough to have outrun the creatures alone, but he'd prioritised getting Counter Arrow out alive. Back then, she didn't understand why he'd hidden his abilities, but she did realise he was the kind of person who'd sacrifice himself to save others. From there, her feelings for him gradually began to change. Sara started to take an interest in what he said and did. She tried to dismiss her budding feelings, reminding herself that she hated adventurers who were born into nobility, or really that she just hated nobles as a whole. But the denial didn't stick, and somewhere in her heart, she realised that Rudeus was different from the nobles she hated. The mess in Trier Forest was the last straw in getting her to admit her true feelings, or perhaps it was better to call it an opportunity rather than a mess. At death's door in that forest, witnessing Rudeus coming to save her by himself, she finally acknowledged it wasn't hatred in her heart, but rather affection. She'd fallen for Rudeus. With that realisation, Sara took an assertive approach. She started inviting him to their hangouts and actively engaging him in conversation. The more they talked, the more her affection for him grew. When she looked at him, she felt his blossoming affection for her. That was why she proposed a date and moved forward with the resolve to see it through to the end. Sara was too embarrassed to confess her feelings directly, so she planned to use her life debt to him as a pretext for bedding him. Then she'd decided she would reveal her true feelings once they'd slept together, which was why what followed came as such a shock. His body didn't react to hers. Rudeus seemed like he cared about her and even seemed receptive to her feelings for him, but apparently he felt no attraction to her body. It was a slap in the face. If she'd had the wits to watch Rudeus's reaction more closely, she would have realised he was in shock too. He hadn't intended this to happen, and he was just as anxious as her. Unfortunately, it was Sara's first time, and she didn't have enough composure for that. It was all she could do to spit some words at him to save her pride and to get out of there. She'd sobbed as she'd fled back to the inn and continued to cry as she explained the situation to Suzanne. She spent the entire night in tears, but somehow resolved to put on a cheery front the next day. But Rudeus wasn't at their meeting spot the next day. At his inn, the owner told him he'd left the previous night and not returned. Asking around, they learned that Soldat had dragged him off someplace. Rudeus, and the whole of Counter Arrow in fact, did not get along with Soldat. Maybe he and Soldat had gotten into it, and Soldat had dragged him off to hang him. As Sara fretted over the possibilities, she and Suzanne followed Rudeus's tracks. That was when they spotted him, at the entrance to the red light district, kissing a red-haired escort. Unbelievable. After Sara hadn't been able to satisfy him, he'd gone and had sex with a prostitute instead. Soldat stood nearby, and the two of them were clearly hammered. Then she heard what he said. Based on everything she'd seen and heard, Sara came to this conclusion. Rudeus had spent the night with Soldat, bedding women and downing the same alcohol he refused to drink with her and the other members of Counter Arrow. He laughed as he recounted how utterly undesirable and unattractive her body had been. Her shock and devastation took over, keeping her from putting together the telltale clues that suggested otherwise. Her affection for him instantly turned inside out, into loathing. If Sara had been a little bit older, she might have been able to think about this calmly. Unfortunately, she was just a 16-year-old girl. Teenagers her age were certain that everything they saw and felt was fact. Besides, she'd lived her whole life as an adventurer and had no idea how to restrain the surge of emotion that resulted. She certainly didn't realise that she had a bad habit of lying to herself and ignoring the truth. "Hey, Sara." Suzanne was a bit more mature in that respect. She'd seen Rudeus and Soldat too, but her impression of the encounter was slightly different. Now that her emotions had cooled, she realised there was something off about what Rudeus had said. The boy she saw that night was not the Rudeus she knew. Something had happened. Suzanne had been in this sort of situation before, and she knew the danger in taking what you saw at face value. On the other hand, it was possible Rudeus really had been dishonest with them, which is why she opted to first comfort Sara, rather than act as a mediator. "Do you think maybe we kind of misunderstood the situation?" Suzanne asked. "What part did we misunderstand?" Sara barked back at her. After we, and then he had the audacity to show up with some prostitute and start belittling me." "Think about it," Suzanne urged her. "Could Rudeus really be such a despicable guy?" "No, duh. He just hid it from us this entire time. I was fooled. We all were. Who knows, maybe he was even in league with Stepped Leader back at the Galgal ruins." "Oh boy," Suzanne shrugged helplessly. She wasn't well versed in affairs of romance herself, so she didn't have any good advice to offer. While she searched for words, Sara continued to brim with unfiltered resentment. Timothy interjected. "What's wrong? Isn't it about time you guys tell me what happened too?" "Sara, can I give him the non-specifics?" Sara didn't care that Timothy was the party leader. She had no interest in sharing the details of her situation, but knowing how it might impact the party's mood, she weakly nodded at Suzanne. "Okay, so what happened is..." Suzanne spoke in a whisper, relaying the events to Timothy. She did her utmost to keep it vague and remain as objective as possible. After a few moments, Timothy suddenly looked up. "Soldat, huh? Perhaps you should ask that escort for the exact details of what happened then." "But Soldat hates us," Suzanne protested. "The only one he hates is me, and Rudeus, but you saw them together. Maybe he was trying to help. The man has a bad attitude and talks trash, but I've heard rumours that he's good at looking after people. If he really was rotten to the core, he wouldn't be the leader of a veteran S-rank party like Stepped Leader. Besides, if Soldat really wanted to get at Sara, he wouldn't go about it in such a roundabout manner. He'd have a man wait in her room or in a back alley for her, or..." "Timothy, we get it," Suzanne cut in. "Enough." Sara lifted her head. She had to admit that Timothy had a point. She'd been too caught up in self-pity to really observe her surroundings that night, but it had seemed that Rudeus was depressed too. Maybe the way things played out had been beyond even his control. "Let me ask him about it when we get home," Suzanne offered. "No, I'll ask him myself," Sara resolved. "And if it turns out I just jumped to conclusions, then I'll apologise." However, by the time Sara returned to the town, Rudeus was nowhere to be found. He was neither at the Adventurers Guild nor at the inn. "Quagmire? Dunno, haven't seen him today." Unable to find him anywhere else, Sara ventured into the pleasure district. The businesses there were already beginning to open as night approached, but customers had yet to start arriving, so numbers on the streets were still thin. Sara began asking after Rudeus's location. Perhaps she suspected, in the back of her mind, that he might return here tonight. She went through several brothels, which were all preparing to open, before she spotted a certain woman. It's you," Sara gasped. "Oh." It was Elise. Sara didn't know the woman's name, just that she was a prostitute and that she'd witnessed her kissing Rudeus on the cheek that morning. "Hey, do you happen to know where Rudeus is?" "No, afraid not. Perhaps the Adventurers Guild?" Elise frowned at the sudden visitor, not recognising her. "He wasn't there. He came and saw you last night, didn't he? Do you know anything?" "Ah, you must be Sara." That was enough for Elise to guess the identity of the girl before her. She glared unforgivingly at Sara, remembering why Rudeus, who'd helped a girl she considered a younger sister, had come to her yesterday, and the expression on his face, and the emotions he'd struggled with as he went home. "What do you plan to do when you find him? Back him into a corner again?" "Back him into a corner?" Sara echoed back, surprised. "I just wanted to talk to him, about yesterday." "Very well, then I'll answer for you." Elise began recounting Rudeus's story, with every intention of laying the blame on Sara. Escorts were generally prohibited from disclosing details about their customers, but she felt like she had to share this. Impotence? After listening to the whole thing, Sara tilted her head. She'd never even heard of the concept before. "It's an illness where men aren't able to get it up anymore. He's already greatly saddened and upset about the situation. What more do you plan to say to him?" "No, Elise ignored her and continued. "If you didn't realise how hurt he was, then you're not ready to be his partner. Don't you think you should give him some space?" "Yeah, I guess so." Sara had nothing to say in her defence, so she took her leave. Once out of the pleasure district, she tottered down the road back to her inn, where Suzanne waited for her. "Oh, welcome back, Sara. I just heard that Rudeus apparently left the town this morning. What do you want to do? Should we go after him?" "No." Sara just continued to her room with a glum look on her face. She flopped onto her bed and reflected on what had happened. Now she was not only weighed down by her own pain, but by the knowledge that Rudeus had been hurt as well. She continued to digest that fact well into the late hours, finally mumbling, "I would at least have liked to have apologised." But she was too scared to pursue him. She feared he might not listen, feared he would push her away. Additionally, she realised that his leaving town without saying anything to them was also a sign of rejection. A sob escaped her throat. In the end, Sara curled up in her bed like a turtle and didn't move at all. When dawn broke and she finally drew herself out of bed, she was keenly aware of two things: that she had dark circles beneath her eyes, and that Rudeus had rejected her. She knew her love had ended, and as she watched the rising sun, she thought to herself, "But if it comes to pass that we meet again, I'd like to apologise, and be sincere about it." So, as you can see, while Rudeus probably left thinking Sara would never know his side of things and would remain hurt and resentful towards him, her biggest regret is really that she didn't get a chance to apologise. This, of course, allows her to simply feel sad about what happened, rather than the loathing she had for him at first, and she makes the mature choice to grieve for the relationship and then move on, rather than trying to chase after Rudeus. Sara clearly grew up somewhat from this experience, and learned that her initial thoughts and reactions may not always be all there is to a situation. Now, whether she ever will get to talk this over with Rudeus is a matter for the spoiler video about the characters from this arc, but either way, the light novel ends with Sara sad and regretful, but in a position to understand what happened and move on. Rudeus, on the other hand, seemingly saw the situation as one he had messed up so irreparably that the best thing to do is leave. This has enabled him to move forward in his life, as we saw in episode 4, and will continue to see in the university arc that will properly begin in episode 5. But when it comes to Sara, the first relationship he attempted after Eris, well, that's going to remain an unpleasant and shameful memory for him. But what do you guys think? Does knowing how Sara felt change your perspective on the character or on how the arc ended? Do you think that they could even patch things up and get back together someday? Let me know in the comments. As always, thank you to my supporters on Patreon and to those of you who support the channel with donations via Ko-fi, and of course to today's video sponsor Atlas VPN. Thank you too to those of you who helped me out by subscribing to the channel and of course watching my videos. Thanks for watching this one, and I hope to see you again very soon.